Take, where I will be asking Tim questions from you guys, the audience. Let's get right into it. What's your take on how to negotiate limitation of liability with regard to data breaches, especially when the other party demands unlimited liability for any data breach?
When you think about the purpose of a limitation of liability provision in the first place, it's meant to make sure that the damages that one can recover from a breach of contract is consistent with the impacts of that breach, right? And the direct impacts of that breach usually. Limitations of liability typically do two things. They either impose a maximum financial liability, but there's also a limitation of the categories of damages under which a party could recover. And so you have broadly a couple of categories. You have direct damages, and then you have indirect damages. And in indirect damages, you have all sorts of other types of damages, special, consequential, et cetera, et cetera. There's a whole bunch of them. Lost profits, loss of business reputation. There's a lot of things in there. Typically, those remedies, those sort of indirect damage remedies, are usually reserved for damages that are not easily quantified by money, right? So you see it frequently with in a limitation liability clause, for example. You may accept misappropriation of intellectual property, right? And you can't steal my IP, and then you steal it. Well, now that breach, i.e. you stealing my intellectual property, is accepted from the limitation of liability. A breach of confidentiality is another one that's often excluded from the damages, categorical damages exclusion and a limitation of liability provision, because it's really hard to put a dollar sign on that. Mm-hmm. And so historically, from a case law perspective, that's where sort of a lot of these other areas of damages have come from. And so when you look at something like a data breach, it actually is relatively predictable. Your damages are predictable because there are actually statutes in most states that have statutory damages associated with leaking of personally identifiable information, things like that. So while it may be a lot of work, you actually can go and calculate those damages, right? And so those are your direct damages, and those direct damages are sufficient for the breach, right? So, when I talk about negotiating that, it really is just getting back to basics, like fundamentally speaking, what should the limitation of liability do from a categorical exclusion of damages, right? Those things that are foreseeable, predictable, and quantifiable, you shouldn't be able to collect lost profits for those breaches, right? It just doesn't make sense. It's not consistent with prior case law. And while there may be cases out there that are a little bit, decided differently, largely you're able to really get those direct damages. Mm-hmm. There are categories of damages that are not, like I said, like your IP misappropriation, mm-hmm. your breaches of confidentiality, where maybe you do go get some lost profits or lost reputation or something like that, mm-hmm. right? So that's the way that I look at it and approach it.
Thanks for listening, and send in your questions to cockpitcouncil@linksquares.com.